The origins of the Cold War, spanning from 1941 to 1991, were deeply rooted in the mutual suspicion and ideological differences between the United States and the Soviet Union, which had surfaced even before World War II ended. As the war drew to a close, both superpowers began to perceive each other not as allies in a shared victory over fascism, but as potential threats to their respective security and global influence. This growing suspicion was crystallized in two pivotal documents: the Long Telegram, sent by American diplomat George Kennan in February 1946, and the Novikov Telegram, sent by Soviet Ambassador Nikolai Novikov in September 1946. The Long Telegram was a detailed report sent by Kennan from the U.S. Embassy in Moscow to the State Department in Washington. In this telegram, Kennan outlined his view that the Soviet Union was inherently expansionist and that its leaders were driven by a combination of communist ideology and a deep-seated sense of insecurity. He argued that the Soviets would relentlessly seek to expand their influence wherever they could, but that they were also sensitive to force and could be contained if the United States adopted a firm and strategic approach. Kennan's analysis was influential in shaping U.S. foreign policy, as it provided a framework for understanding Soviet behavior and laid the groundwork for the policy of containment, which would dominate American strategy during the Cold War. On the other side, the Soviet Union harbored its own suspicions about American intentions. In September 1946, Nikolai Novikov, the Soviet ambassador to the United States, sent a telegram to Moscow that mirrored Kennan's concerns but in reverse. The Novikov telegram painted the United States as an aggressive, imperialist power bent on world domination. Novikov warned that the U.S. was preparing for war against the Soviet Union, and that its post-war economic and military policies were aimed at securing global hegemony. This telegram reinforced Stalin's belief that the Soviet Union needed to strengthen its position in Eastern Europe and beyond to defend against what was perceived as an imminent threat from the West. The mutual distrust reflected in these telegrams quickly translated into concrete actions. In the United States, President Harry Truman, who had taken office after the death of Franklin D. Roosevelt in April 1945, became increasingly concerned about the spread of communism in Europe and Asia. By early 1947, the situation in Europe was deteriorating, with several countries facing economic collapse and political instability. Greece and Turkey, in particular, were seen as vulnerable to communist influence. In response, Truman announced a new foreign policy initiative in March 1947, known as the Truman Doctrine. This doctrine committed the United States to support free peoples who were resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or outside pressures, a clear reference to the threat of communist expansion. The Truman Doctrine marked a significant shift in American foreign policy, effectively declaring that the U.S. would take an active role in countering the spread of communism worldwide. Building on the principles of the Truman Doctrine, the United States launched the Marshall Plan in June 1947. Officially known as the European Recovery Program, the Marshall Plan was an ambitious economic aid initiative designed to help rebuild war-torn Europe, prevent the spread of communism by stabilizing economies, and promote political stability. The U.S. government believed that poverty and economic despair were breeding grounds for communism, and by revitalizing European economies, they hoped to undermine Soviet influence in the region. The plan offered significant financial assistance to European countries, but it required them to cooperate in their economic recovery and adopt market-oriented policies. 16 Western European nations eventually accepted aid through the Marshall Plan, leading to a rapid recovery and the strengthening of pro-Western governments. The Soviet Union, however, viewed the Marshall Plan with deep suspicion. Stalin saw it as an attempt by the United States to extend its influence over Europe by economic means and to create a bloc of countries aligned with American interests. In response, the Soviet Union refused to participate in the Marshall Plan and pressured its Eastern European allies to do the same. Instead, in October 1947, the USSR created the Communist Information Bureau, or Cominform. The Cominform was an organization designed to coordinate the activities of communist parties across Europe and to ensure that they followed the directives of Moscow. It was also intended to counter the influence of the Marshall Plan by promoting Soviet-style economic and political policies in Eastern Europe. Through the Cominform, Stalin sought to tighten control over the Eastern Bloc and prevent any deviation from the communist line. The establishment of the Truman Doctrine, the implementation of the Marshall Plan, and the creation of the Cominform all contributed to the deepening divide between East and West. These actions solidified the emerging bipolar world order, where the United States and the Soviet Union led opposing blocs in a global struggle for influence. The mutual suspicion and conflicting actions during this period laid the foundations for the Cold War, a conflict characterized by ideological rivalry, military alliances, and a series of proxy wars that would dominate international relations for the next 4 decades.